My beloved child. Something shifted today, and the first person to notice it was not the one you expected. It was someone who had been quietly watching the distance between you and this connection, someone who had noticed the little changes you might have dismissed, the delayed words, the strange pauses, the moments when something sincere seemed ready to happen and then suddenly disappeared. And today, that person finally stopped observing and said something. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Almost carefully, as though they had spent hours deciding whether speaking was the right thing to do. They warned that a third party had become far more involved than anyone realized. But here is what makes this different: the warning was not about betrayal, and it was not meant to make anyone afraid. It was about influence. A conversation here. A suggestion there. A small misunderstanding repeated until it began sounding like truth. And the special person who noticed it finally understood something that changed the entire meaning of what has been happening between you and the person on your mind. Don't skip, because what happened after that warning is where this story begins turning in a direction nobody around them expected. Earlier today, everything looked ordinary. Your person was moving through their usual routine, carrying thoughts they had learned to hide beneath ordinary conversations. On the outside, nothing seemed different. Yet there was one detail they could not stop returning to: something they had heard about you did not match something they personally remembered about you. The difference was small enough to ignore at first. That is exactly what they tried to do. They told themselves there was probably an explanation. They changed the subject. They went back to whatever they were doing. But some truths do not arrive with noise. Sometimes they begin as one quiet question that refuses to disappear. What if the version of you they had been hearing about was never completely accurate? That question followed them. And then the special person entered the conversation. There was no dramatic confrontation. No raised voices. Just a sentence spoken at exactly the right moment. You should probably ask yourself where that information actually came from. Your person became still. Not because the sentence was frightening, but because they already knew the answer. The same third party had been present around several of the moments that created confusion between you. Suddenly, unrelated memories began connecting. A misunderstood message. A conversation that reached them slightly changed. A moment when they were encouraged to wait rather than speak to you directly. A harmless comment that somehow became something heavier after passing through someone else. One incident could be coincidence. Two could be misunderstanding. But when your person mentally placed everything side by side, a pattern appeared. And what surprised them most was not what the third party had said. It was how easily they had allowed someone else's interpretation to sit between their own feelings and what they actually knew about you. Stay till the end, because the realization that followed was deeply personal. Your person did not immediately become angry with anyone. Instead, they became disappointed in themselves. They remembered times when their instinct told them to reach out, yet another voice convinced them to hesitate. They remembered moments when they wanted to believe the simplest explanation, yet someone complicated it. Most of all, they remembered you. Not the version described by somebody else. You as they had personally experienced you. The way you responded during difficult conversations. The way certain small details mattered to you. The moments when you could have made something about yourself but chose patience instead. Suddenly those memories carried more weight than every opinion they had been hearing. And that is when something shocking happened today, not shocking because it was extreme, but because it was completely unlike the way your person had been handling this connection. They stopped asking other people what they should think. They stopped searching for interpretations. They stopped trying to predict every possible outcome. For the first time in a while, they chose to trust their own memory. Imagine the quietness of that moment. A phone nearby. A familiar name somewhere in their thoughts. Perhaps an old conversation still sitting in their messages. Perhaps a photograph, a voice note, a sentence remembered word for word. Whatever the physical reminder was, it brought them back to something undeniable. There had been sincerity here before outside opinions became louder. And then another detail surfaced. The special person who had warned them revealed that the third party had recently asked a strangely specific question about you. Not an insulting question. Not even an openly suspicious one. It was almost casual. Are you still thinking about them? Your person had answered too quickly. No. But the special person noticed what happened immediately afterward. Your person became quiet. Their expression changed. They looked away. That single reaction said more than the answer ever could. Because sometimes a person says, no, when the truthful answer feels too vulnerable to explain. Sometimes they say they have moved forward while still carrying a conversation they wish had ended differently. And sometimes they do not realize how much someone matters until another person repeatedly tries to convince them that the connection should not matter at all. Something important is waiting for you, because this is where the warning became something much deeper than information about a third party. It became a mirror. Your person started seeing how often they had allowed uncertainty to make decisions for them. They had been waiting for perfect clarity before acting, but perfect clarity rarely appears first. Sometimes clarity comes after someone finally chooses one honest conversation. That thought stayed with them. What if they had simply asked you? What if instead of assuming why you became quiet, they had asked? What if instead of allowing someone else to explain your intentions, they had listened to you? What if the distance between you was never proof that the connection meant nothing, but evidence that too many things had remained unsaid? There is something strangely powerful about reaching a question you can no longer avoid. Your person reached one today. They asked themselves, if nobody else had ever given me an opinion about this person, what would I believe based only on what I experienced? And the answer surprised them. They would believe that you mattered. They would believe there had been something genuine between you. They would believe the story was more complicated than the third party had made it sound. Most importantly, they would believe there was still something worth understanding. Notice what happened next, because this is the moment the emotional direction changed. The third party attempted another conversation. Nothing dramatic. Just another familiar suggestion disguised as concern. Maybe it was something like, you're better off leaving that alone, or, why reopen something that already became complicated? Normally, your person might have listened. Today they didn't. They asked one simple question: why does it matter so much to you what I decide? Silence. That silence became louder than any explanation. Your person had never asked that before. They had been so focused on whether the third party's advice was correct that they had never questioned why this person seemed so invested in keeping you at a distance. And again, this does not automatically make the third party cruel or malicious. People sometimes interfere because of their own insecurities, assumptions, loyalty, jealousy, protectiveness, or incomplete understanding. They may genuinely believe they are helping. But good intentions do not always create good outcomes. Your person finally recognized that distinction. Advice can be well-meant and still be wrong. Someone can care and still misunderstand. Someone can speak confidently and still not know what happened inside a connection they never personally lived. That realization softened something inside your person. Instead of trying to decide who was right and who was wrong, they began asking a better question: what do I actually want? And there you were again. Not as an obsession. Not as some impossible answer to everything. Simply as a person connected to an unfinished truth. There were things they wanted to explain. Things they wanted to hear from you directly. Questions they had been carrying longer than they admitted. Their mind went back to one particular moment between you, a moment that seemed insignificant when it happened but feels different now. Perhaps you said something simple that they misunderstood. Perhaps you tried to show them you cared in a way they could not recognize at the time. Perhaps you stepped away because you were tired of competing with confusion. Whatever that memory was, today they saw it through a different lens. And the thought that followed was quiet but powerful: maybe I never gave them the chance to tell me what they actually meant. That realization did not create panic. It created responsibility. Your person understood they could not rewrite yesterday, but they could stop repeating the same pattern tomorrow. They could ask instead of assume. They could listen instead of interpret. They could choose direct communication instead of letting every outside voice stand between two people who actually needed to speak to each other. And then came the smallest action of the entire day, the one nobody else noticed. Your person opened something connected to you. Perhaps your contact. Perhaps an old message thread. Perhaps a photograph they had not looked at for a while. Their finger hovered there longer than expected. They did not immediately send anything. That hesitation matters, because this is not a story about someone impulsively rushing toward you. It is about someone becoming more honest with themselves. They were deciding whether they were ready to approach you without pride, without other people's opinions, without pretending they already knew your answer. For a few seconds, they simply stared. Then they did something different. Instead of closing it immediately, they stayed. They reread. They remembered. And for the first time, the past did not feel like something they needed to defend themselves against. It felt like something they needed to understand. Don't skip, there is one more detail from today that changes what that hesitation means. The special person returned later and said something your person was not prepared to hear: I think you already knew something was off. You just didn't trust yourself enough to admit it. Those words landed differently. Because your person realized there had been moments when their intuition disagreed with the third party. They remembered defending you once when you were not there. They remembered thinking, that doesn't sound like them. They remembered noticing inconsistencies but choosing not to investigate because confronting the truth would have required making a decision. And that was the real issue. The third party may have influenced the situation, but your person also understood that blaming someone else completely would be too easy. They had a choice. They still have a choice. That recognition is what makes what happened today meaningful. Instead of deciding to confront the third party and create more conflict, your person chose a calmer direction. They decided that if they wanted truth, they needed to go closer to the source. And the source was never the third party. It was you. Imagine how different that feels. No dramatic accusations. No battle for attention. No attempt to prove anyone wrong. Just one person slowly recognizing that the most respectful way to understand another human being is to speak with them directly. That may sound simple, but sometimes simplicity is the hardest lesson to reach after months of overthinking. Your person began forming words in their mind. Not a grand confession. Not something overwhelming. Something more believable. Maybe, there's something I think I misunderstood. Maybe, can I ask you something honestly? Maybe simply, I've been thinking about what happened. They deleted one version in their mind and replaced it with another. They wanted it to sound natural. They did not want you to feel pressured. They knew that whatever happens next needs to leave room for your feelings too. And this is where you should remember something about yourself. You do not need to chase clarity from someone who is not ready to offer it. You do not need to compete with a third party. You do not need to convince anyone of your value. Your part is simpler and stronger than that. Remain honest about what you feel, maintain your boundaries, and allow other people to take responsibility for the choices they make. If a conversation comes, you can meet it calmly. If it does not, you have still lost nothing by choosing your own peace. But tonight, somewhere inside this unfolding story, your person is thinking differently than they were yesterday. One warning created one question. One question exposed several assumptions. Those assumptions led back to memories of you. And those memories have now brought them to the edge of a decision they have been avoiding for longer than they want to admit. The third party does not know everything that shifted inside them today. The special person who gave the warning may not even realize how deeply their words landed. And you have not yet heard the question your person has finally decided they need answered. That is the part still hidden. Because when your person looked back at the conversation they almost sent, there was one sentence they kept returning to, the sentence that explains why the third party's influence worked for so long, why your person remained quiet even when they missed you, and why today's realization may finally change the way they approach you. They have not said that sentence aloud yet. But they are closer than they have ever been, and what they realized about their own feelings is where the next part begins. The sentence they could not stop returning to was painfully simple: I think I let other people decide what I was supposed to feel. And once your person admitted that privately, something inside them became quieter. Not easier, not instantly resolved, but clearer. Because there is a strange kind of relief that comes when someone finally stops pretending confusion appeared out of nowhere. Your person began recognizing that the distance between you was never created by one single event. It formed slowly, through hesitation, outside opinions, unfinished conversations, and moments when they chose silence because silence felt safer than vulnerability. Yet today, for the first time, they were no longer looking at that history as proof that things could never be understood. They were looking at it as evidence that there were still questions nobody had honestly answered. And one of those questions was about you. Not what somebody said about you. Not what the third party assumed about you. You. What you actually felt. What you were actually trying to communicate. What you may have been carrying quietly while everyone around the situation formed conclusions without hearing your side. Stay till the end, because something important changed when your person allowed themselves to imagine that possibility. They remembered a moment when you had gone unusually quiet. At the time, they interpreted it as distance. Someone else may even have reinforced that interpretation, suggesting you had stopped caring or that your attention had moved somewhere else. But now your person looked at the memory differently. What if your silence was not indifference? What if it was exhaustion? What if you had reached a point where explaining yourself repeatedly felt more painful than stepping back? The thought unsettled them gently because it made sense in a way they were not prepared for. Suddenly, certain pieces of your behavior no longer seemed mysterious. You may not have been withdrawing because the connection meant nothing. You may have been protecting your peace because too many outside voices had entered something that should have remained between two people. That realization became one of the deepest moments of the day. Your person did not know whether they were completely correct, and that mattered. They understood they could no longer replace one assumption with another assumption. If they wanted to know what you felt, there was only one respectful path forward. Eventually, they would need to ask you. And somehow, that simple truth felt bigger than every complicated theory they had entertained before. Then something unexpected happened. The special person who gave the original warning shared another detail not to create conflict, but because they believed your person deserved context. Apparently, the third party had recently said something revealing during a completely ordinary conversation. They had not directly criticized you. Instead, they had said, "I just don't understand why you still care what happens with them." That sentence stayed with your person. Why would someone ask that unless they had already noticed that your person still cared? The third party may have believed the connection was finished, yet even they could see something had never fully disappeared. Your name still changed the atmosphere. A small reference to you still created a pause. Your person could move through an entire day seeming completely unaffected, but when someone mentioned you unexpectedly, there was always a fraction of a second when their attention shifted. They had become skilled at hiding it from others. They had not become skilled at hiding it from themselves. Don't skip, because this is where your person discovered the difference between missing someone and understanding why you missed them. They had told themselves they missed familiarity. They said they missed the conversations because they had become part of a routine. They convinced themselves they were only curious about how you were doing. But when they became completely still and allowed the truth to rise without correcting it, something deeper appeared. They missed the feeling of being understood without needing to explain every detail. They missed the way your presence made certain moments feel lighter. They missed the version of themselves that existed when they were not constantly questioning whether they were allowed to care. And this realization brought them directly back to the third party's influence. The greatest effect may not have been any single statement. It may have been the constant suggestion that your person needed a reason to feel what they felt. Every time they wanted to move toward you, somebody introduced another question. Every time they considered trusting the connection, another interpretation appeared. Eventually, your person stopped asking whether their feelings were genuine and started asking whether their feelings were acceptable to everyone else. Today, that changed. They finally asked themselves, "Why did I need permission?" The question landed almost like a light turning on in a room that had been dim for a long time. They did not need anyone to approve of their emotions. They only needed to handle those emotions responsibly. They could care about you without forcing an outcome. They could want clarity without demanding it. They could acknowledge that something remained unfinished without pretending they knew exactly how the story would end. And strangely, that mature understanding made them feel closer to taking action than all the dramatic thoughts they had carried before. Something important is waiting for you, because the next thing your person did was almost invisible, yet it revealed how seriously they were taking this shift. They stopped discussing you with other people. Not forever, perhaps, but for now. When another conversation began drifting toward your name, they redirected it. When someone asked whether they planned to do anything, they simply said, "I need to think for myself." That line surprised the room. It was calm. There was no accusation inside it. But everyone understood what it meant. Your person was drawing a boundary around their own decision-making. For the first time, they were separating advice from authority. People could have opinions. People could care. People could share what they believed. But nobody else would decide how your person approached you. The third party noticed that change immediately. And their reaction was not explosive. It was quieter than that. They became unusually curious. They started asking small questions. Why are you being different today? Did someone tell you something? Are you thinking about reaching out? Your person did not answer every question. That was another change. In the past, they may have explained themselves too quickly. They may have tried to reassure everyone, including people who had no real place inside the connection. Today, they understood that privacy was not dishonesty. Some decisions need silence while they are still becoming clear. Your person simply said, "I'm trying to understand something." Nothing more. And that answer left the third party without the influence they had grown accustomed to having. The interesting part is that your person was not trying to punish them. They were simply reclaiming space. That space immediately filled with memories. One memory in particular returned stronger than the others. It involved something you once said that your person misunderstood completely. At the time, your words may have sounded guarded. Perhaps you said, "I can't keep doing this the same way." Your person heard rejection. But today they heard something else inside that memory, a request for change. Maybe you were not saying you wanted them gone. Maybe you were saying you could not keep carrying uncertainty alone. That interpretation was not guaranteed, and your person knew it. Still, the possibility affected them because it forced them to admit they may have walked away from a conversation that needed one more honest sentence. How many connections become complicated not because love disappears, but because two people interpret the same moment differently and never return to compare what they heard? Your person sat with that question longer than they expected. Then another memory appeared. A time you had done something small that nobody else knew about. Perhaps you remembered a detail they mentioned weeks earlier. Perhaps you checked on them without making a big performance of it. Perhaps you offered kindness during a difficult moment and never asked for recognition. These were not dramatic memories, but that is exactly why they felt important. Real care often hides inside details that do not look impressive from the outside. And those details could not be rewritten by somebody else's opinion. Your person had experienced them directly. The third party could reinterpret conversations. They could question motives. They could introduce doubt. But they could not erase what your person personally remembered feeling around you. That distinction became stronger throughout the day. And then came a moment that made everything more personal. Your person wondered what the situation must have looked like from your side. Imagine being close to someone who keeps pulling away after conversations you were never part of. Imagine sensing a shift in their energy without understanding what caused it. Imagine trying to speak honestly while realizing someone else's voice might already be inside the room even when that person is not physically present. Your person had rarely looked at the situation that way. When they finally did, they felt something they had been avoiding: empathy. Not guilt that needed punishment, but empathy that invited responsibility. They wondered whether you had felt dismissed. Whether you had questioned yourself. Whether you had eventually stopped explaining because you believed your words would always arrive second to someone else's interpretation. And that possibility touched them deeply. They wanted to know whether they had made you feel unheard. Not because they could guarantee repairing everything, but because they did not want to repeat the same pattern if another conversation ever happened. Stay a little longer, because this is where their imagined message changed. Earlier, they had been thinking about opening with something casual. Maybe pretending nothing serious had happened. Maybe sending a simple greeting and waiting to see what you did. But now that approach felt incomplete. Your person realized that if they were going to contact you, they needed to bring more honesty than that. They did not want to burden you with a dramatic confession, but they also did not want to hide behind small talk. So they began mentally forming a different sentence. I think I allowed other people's opinions to affect the way I understood what happened between us, and I've been thinking about that. They read the sentence in their mind. Then they changed it. Too formal. Too heavy. They tried again. I've been realizing I may have misunderstood some things. That felt closer. Then another thought stopped them. What if you had already found peace? What if reopening the conversation would be unfair? This question mattered because your person was finally thinking about your needs, not only their own desire for clarity. They did not want to enter your space simply because they were having a realization. They understood that growth includes accepting that another person may have boundaries. So the message became gentler in their mind. Something that would leave you room to decide. Something like, there's something I've been reflecting on. If you're comfortable talking sometime, I'd like to understand your perspective. That sentence felt different. No pressure. No assumption. No demand that you respond in a certain way. Just an open door. And your person stayed with that version longer than the others. What happened next is subtle, but it may be the most meaningful part so far. They did not send it immediately. They closed their phone and went through the rest of their day. That pause was not cowardice. It was consideration. Your person wanted to make sure they were reaching toward you for the right reason. Were they lonely? Were they reacting to the third party? Were they trying to prove something? Or did they genuinely want to understand you better and take responsibility for their part? Those questions followed them through ordinary moments. While walking somewhere. While sitting alone. While hearing a song that unexpectedly brought back a memory. While looking out a window and realizing how much emotional noise had surrounded something that once felt very simple. By evening, their answer had become clearer: they did not want to contact you to win. They wanted to contact you to listen. That difference changed everything. Because when someone reaches out to win, they arrive with arguments. When someone reaches out to listen, they arrive with questions. Your person began identifying the questions they wished they had asked long ago. What were you feeling when you pulled away? Did I make you feel like I didn't trust you? Was there something you tried to tell me that I missed? What did you actually want from me? Each question revealed another layer of how little direct communication had happened during the moments that mattered most. They had assumed they knew your answers. Today, they admitted they did not. And strangely, not knowing no longer felt threatening. It felt honest. The special person who warned them saw the difference in their mood later. They asked, "Are you okay?" Your person answered, "I think I'm finally being honest with myself." Nothing about that statement guaranteed a reunion. Nothing promised a particular ending. But it marked the beginning of something healthier. Your person was no longer building decisions around imagined certainty. They were accepting reality as it was. Something meaningful existed. Misunderstandings happened. Outside influence made those misunderstandings harder. Both people may have been hurt or confused. And now one person had reached a point where they wanted truth more than they wanted to protect their pride. That is powerful because pride had been quietly shaping this connection for longer than anyone realized. Pride told your person not to ask because asking might reveal they still cared. Pride told them to appear unaffected because vulnerability could be misunderstood. Pride told them that if you really cared, you should somehow know what they needed without being told. But today, pride started losing its authority. Your person understood that mature connection requires communication, not mind reading. They could not expect you to solve questions they never voiced. They could not expect you to reassure doubts they never admitted. And they could not blame you for walking away from a door they kept closing. That realization softened them. Not into regret that consumed them, but into accountability that could actually lead somewhere. Don't skip, because the third party became part of the story again in a completely unexpected way. Later, they approached your person and said something almost defensive: "I was only trying to protect you." For a moment, your person did not know how to respond. Then instead of arguing, they said, "I know you may have thought you were helping." The third party relaxed slightly. But your person continued, "I still need to make my own decisions." There it was. The boundary. Calm, clear, and impossible to misunderstand. The third party did not have a dramatic response. They simply became quiet. Perhaps because they realized something had changed permanently. Your person was not cutting anyone off. They were not creating sides. They were simply taking back responsibility for their own heart. And there is something deeply freeing about that. When your person walked away from that conversation, they felt lighter than they had expected. Not because every problem was solved, but because the problem finally belonged to the right people. Whatever happened between you and your person should ultimately be understood by you and your person. Advice could still exist around it, but it could no longer replace direct truth. That realization gave your person a new kind of courage. They opened their phone again. Your name appeared. The draft they had been mentally rewriting all day returned. For a few seconds, their thumb hovered over the screen. Then they typed something. Not the entire confession. Not everything they had realized. Just enough to begin. A greeting. A careful sentence. An acknowledgement that they had been reflecting. They read it once. Then twice. Then they noticed something that made them stop. There was one word in the message that did not feel honest. They had written, recently. But the truth was, they had been thinking about you much longer than recently. So they erased it. That tiny deletion meant more than it seemed. Your person was tired of minimizing what they felt. They did not want to exaggerate it, but they did not want to hide it either. They changed the sentence to, "I've been thinking about some things between us for a while." Better. More truthful. Then they added another line, "I think there are parts of what happened that I never understood properly." And then they stopped again. The message was not sent yet. Because a final realization arrived, one that may shape everything that happens next. Your person understood that contacting you was only the beginning. If you answered, they would have to be ready to hear something they might not expect. You might tell them you felt hurt. You might tell them you misunderstood them too. You might tell them you still care. You might tell them you have moved forward and need things to remain peaceful. Any of those answers would require maturity. Were they truly prepared for that? They sat with the question. And then, quietly, they decided something, whatever your truth was, they would rather hear it than keep living inside assumptions. That was the real breakthrough today. Not the warning. Not the third party. Not even the draft message. The breakthrough was your person becoming willing to hear your truth without trying to control it. Something important is waiting for you, because as they looked at those unsent words, another message suddenly appeared on their phone. It was from the special person who had warned them earlier. Only one short sentence, "There's one more thing I didn't tell you." Your person stared at it. They had assumed they already knew the full reason behind the warning. Apparently, they did not. Because what this special person had discovered was not another rumor about you. It was something the third party had admitted privately, something that finally explained why they had been so interested in keeping your person uncertain about this connection. And when your person read what came next, they did not become angry. They became completely still, because the truth was far more human, far more emotional, and far more revealing than anything they had imagined.